It is an honor to address the 56th session of the Human Rights Council as the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights of internally displaced persons. Today, I present my third annual report pursuant to the Human Rights Council Resolution 56 and the addendum to the report containing the findings and conclusions on my country visit to Mozambique in 2023. Every year, the number of internally displaced persons globally reaches a record high, with tens of millions of individuals grappling with the devastating consequences of displacement caused by new conflicts, more frequent disasters, and a lack of accountability for human rights abuses. At the end of 2023, there were 68.3 million people internally displaced by conflict and violence. This was an increase of 49% from 5 years ago. Over the past months, we have expressed our despair, outrage, and frustration over the unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza, Sudan, Haiti, to mention but a few. Nearly 83% of Gaza's population is now displaced, with over 70% of homes destroyed. In Sudan, recent reports indicate 9.9 million people internally displaced. Haiti's escalating violence and protection crisis have forced a record of around 600,000 internally displacement in 2024, more than double the figure from 2022. Meanwhile, in Myanmar, the vast majority of the 3 million IDPs are still without proper shelter, without access to food and water. Mr. Vice President, good afternoon, good morning to everyone, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. In addition to the people displaced by conflict and violence, 7.7 million persons were internally displaced at the end of 2023 because of floods, storms, earthquakes, wildfires, and other disasters. The figure does not include displacement due to slow onset disasters like sea level rise and environmental degradation considered in my report. In 2023, the earthquakes of Turkey and Syria triggered 4.7 million displacement. In southern East Africa, Cyclone Freddy triggered 1.4 million movements across these countries. Some high-income countries reported their highest figures ever. Climate change never acts alone as a driver of risk. We know it is contributing to hazards being more frequent and intense, leaving communities more vulnerable. Addressing the underlying drivers of displacement and implementing climate adaptation and mitigation measures is increasingly urgent. Behind these numbers are individuals, stories of loss, resilience, and hope. Their voices must be heard and their rights protected. For all of the importance of policy processes, the time has come to move beyond rhetoric and prioritize implementation. Concrete action is needed to translate our commitments into tangible outcomes for the internally displaced people on the ground. Mr. Vice President, at the invitation of the government of Mozambique, I conducted an official visit to the country from 9 to 21 November 2023. I thank the government for their cooperation before and during the visit. Mozambique has made remarkable progress in responding to a complex displacement situation, driven both by conflict and climate emergency, that resulted in over 1.2 million internally displaced persons and an additional 110 IDPs following the early 2024 attacks in the north. More than 600 people have returned to areas of origin in 2023. I was encouraged to see the commitment shown by Mozambique to the UN Secretary General's Action Agenda on Internal Displacement as a good step towards ensuring durable solutions. But important challenges persist, however, both for the remaining displaced population as well as for those who have returned. In northern Mozambique, the humanitarian response is transitioning towards reconstruction. A comprehensive approach that integrates humanitarian, development, peace-building efforts, and that addresses critical protection needs in conflict-affected and underserved areas, as well as in displacement sites, is required. Despite the protracted nature of displacement in Cabo Delgado, many internally displaced people still rely heavily on humanitarian aid due to challenges in accessing livelihood opportunities, including land for subsistence agriculture. Food insecurity and protection from gender-based violence were particularly acute among internally displaced population, disproportionately affecting women and girls, children, and people with disabilities and older persons. Serious protection risks combined with limited capacity of the government and humanitarian actors have strained the population's coping abilities and increased vulnerabilities. At the time of the visit, the overall protection environment in Cabo Delgado remained volatile, requiring continuous assessment and analysis to inform humanitarian responses, albeit challenges posed by security and lack of infrastructures in hard-to-reach areas. I hope that the government's annual contingency plan and the 2024 humanitarian needs and UN response plan for Mozambique will receive the necessary funding to alleviate the protection risks and concerns, strengthen livelihoods, and enhance resilience of communities. Mr. Vice President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I regret the postponement of my visit to South Sudan and anticipate rescheduling it soon. I look forward to my upcoming visit to the Marshall Islands in October this year and look forward to agreeing on mutual convenient dates for the visit to Vanuatu in 2025. Let me now turn to the thematic study of my report, which is one on the planned relocation of people in the context of disasters and the adverse effects of climate change. To inform my report, and in addition to the desk review, I issued a call for input and held consultations with representatives of civil society, academia, and other organizations based in Asia, the Pacific, Americas, Europe, and Africa. I want to thank all stakeholders who participated in consultations and provided written submissions. Internal displacement in the context of sudden and slow onset disasters and the adverse effects of climate change is expected to increase as climate change intensifies. 70% of the internally displaced persons are in fragile or conflict-affected states that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. People have the fundamental right to stay in their homes or return after displacement. And states have the responsibility to develop climate adaptation, mitigation measures, and disaster prevention to keep human settlements intact whenever possible. Relocation then should only be considered a last resort, if necessary, to protect life and health, and based on consultation with affected communities or upon their request. Relocation should only be undertaken in exceptional circumstances when they are unavoidable and absolutely required due to the impracticality of sustaining human settlements in areas prone to danger. Taking into account that a planned relocation is a process that aims to protect people from risks and impacts related to disasters and environmental change, including the effects of climate change, they constitute internal displacement when people are made to relocate against their will. International and regional instruments, including the UN Guiding Principles, state that arbitrary displacement is prohibited, and authorities are required to explore all feasible alternatives to displacement. Internal displaced people have the right to be protected against the forcibly return to or resettlement in any place where their life, safety, liberty, and all health will be at risk. Framework conventions on climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction offer conceptual policy and legal guidance on planned relocation. In 2023, Pacific Regional Framework on Climate Mobility recognizes the right to stay in places as a fundamental priority and notes that planned relocation should only be undertaken as a measure of last resort and it to be carried out in a safe, dignified, and timely manner. The Kampala Convention instructs states to devise early warning systems in areas of potential displacement and to establish and implement disaster risk reduction strategies. Several states have adopted national instruments on planned relocations: Fiji, Jamaica, Papua New Guinea, Peru, Solomon Islands, Uruguay. Mozambique's national disaster management law includes relocation as a preventive measure and clarifies institutional responsibility. Malawi's Disaster Management Act establishes a procedure for classifying certain disaster-prone areas as high risk. Guatemala Action Plan to prevent, minimize, and address displacement relates to adverse effects of climate change and calls for the development of principles for planned relocations. Countries like Bangladesh, Cote d'Ivoire, Egypt, Grenada, India, Japan, Malawi, Myanmar, Namibia, Pakistan, the Philippines, Territory of American Samoa, Vanuatu, and Vietnam have the disaster risk reduction policies and strategies that refer to planned relocation. It is important to note that even with adopted planned relocation frameworks, consistent implementation institutional capacity, and adequate funding are not always assured. Mr. Vice President, while each case is unique, all too often relocated individuals and communities face profound negative social and cultural impacts and violations of their human rights, including housing, healthcare, education, cultural rights, legal uncertainties over land tenure in relocation. Drawing upon examples of planned relocations received through submissions and consultations, I have concluded that a human rights-based approach to the assessment, the planning, and implementation of planned relocation can mitigate negative human rights impacts and from the start lay the foundation for durable solutions. This requires a government-led, a whole-of-society approach with human rights frameworks in accordance with international human rights norms and standards. My report, therefore, outlines the crucial elements of human rights-based approach to planned relocations, elements often regrettably overlooked, while offering guidance for such relocation in the context of disasters and the adverse effects of climate change. In my report, some of those highlights are that the rights to self-determination, cultural identity, and control over land and resources must be respected. Indigenous people and other affected persons should be informed, consulted, and involved in decision-making, and the agency of relocated persons and their specific needs and vulnerabilities addressed. Planned relocations should aim to improve or restore the living standard of relocated persons and maintain or enhance that of local populations. International regional organizations and the private sector should support these efforts by providing technical, financial, and capacity-building assistance, aiming to prevent displacement, enhancing resilience, and promoting sustainable development. In this regard, the decision at the 20th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to operationalize a fund for loss and damage should include financing for planned relocations. A comprehensive, inclusive, and human rights-based approach to planned relocations is essential to protect and promote the rights of internally displaced persons and affected communities in the face of disasters and the adverse effects of climate change. Thoroughly planned and human rights-based relocations are critical in ensuring the dignity, respect, and justice for those affected. By prioritizing human rights and fostering collaboration, communities will not only survive, but thrive amidst the challenges posed by climate change. I thank you for your support to my mandate, and I look forward to a fruitful, interactive dialogue. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.